Thank you again for inviting me out here, Ronslin. This has been fun and not as fun as being in there in person, but wow, air travel is tough. It is tough. I was in, I don't even know where I was. I was in Arizona just this Monday at our Arizona Council, Arizona's Problem Gambling Symposium. And even just a 1.5 hour flight is like a whole deal. So I appreciate having this option here. And again, that opens out anyone who is visiting California for any reason, or if you're out in LA or you want to see our residential treatment program, you want to visit it, we can set that up for you. If you want to, see, that's our only brick and mortar thing. The rest is all telehealth. But if you want to come out to California and take a look at our tribal casinos or our card clubs, they're definitely eye opening in terms of what they're like. And if you just want to come talk gambling, we're happy to show you the UCLA site. All right, so Ronslin is putting me to work. She's not shy about that. And she's like, oh, I want you to do a couple of talks, and I have no problem with that. So I get to do the second portion here, really gearing toward this lane for clinical treatment of how, and it says sports betting, but it's really all gambling, really emphasizing how gambling impacts physical health, and also talking more about the intersection between substances and now, of course, cannabis. So give me a sense in Kentucky, what's the story with cannabis yet? Is it legal? Is it on the books? Is it we're not sure what we're doing? Is it bluegrass state for a reason? No. What's the story with cannabis there? Okay. So no recreational use as of yet. Okay. So let me get my other billboard for this. My other. That's our cannabis billboard. So that's a fascinating story, and we'll get into that a little bit more about that intersection between cannabis and gambling. Okay. So this is your last bit of the day, and I like the way it says recess afterwards. So that means everyone's going to go out and play and do kickball or something like that. I might not make it all the way to 2:30 because it's been a long day for you all, but we'll get plenty of good info here. All right. So start with the case. So for those of you who've seen clients, this is kind of how I approach this issue between health and gambling. So this is a 48-year-old man who came to our CalGets, our state of California program, referred by an outside therapist for treatment of his gambling. He's got 10-year history of table games, sports betting, bookies, very stereotypical clinical course, a lot of financial debt, 40 grand in debt, a lot of depression, a lot of just misery, just kind of like a meh kind of guy, angry, fights with friends, coworkers, lonely, kind of like what we see, right? And a lot of folks turn to substances, right? Then we get this. He actually works at a casino. He's filed bankruptcy. He does go to GA. This is all on intake. He's telling me he goes to GA weekly, doesn't use substances. He says he's depressed all the time, hopeless, doesn't really view. And we get this a lot. Sometimes he's like, oh, the world is going to pot, right? The world is going to crack. A lot of this, like, why bother? Very pessimistic. We all have clients like that, right? Who are like, well, I don't see the point in anything. He's not taking any psychiatric meds when I see him. He says, well, okay, sure, first intake, I'll come meet with you weekly to talk about my gambling. I'm happy to talk about and try and figure out ways to help my mood. I go to GA. I don't give him any meds the first visit. However, I do a health overview on that first visit. I ask him about physical movement and exercise. He says, no, I don't do that. Zero, like absolutely none. Don't go for walks. Don't play sports. Don't do anything. The most amount of exercise, physical movement I get is from parking my car, walking into my job. Does not smoke, but he works in a casino where people do smoke. He's like, well, remember, he said, I don't drink. I don't have a problem with substances. But when it came to alcohol, he said, 12, 20 standard drinks per week. So the way I ask that is, A standard drink is a 12-ounce beer, it's a 5-ounce glass of wine, or it's a shot of hard liquor. How many of those drinks do you think you average per week? And that's the way of getting a sense. When we do our alcohol screenings, we know anyone above 14 a week for a man or anyone above 7 a week for a woman is now technically in that zone of heavy drinking and should be evaluated. He's got health insurance, fine. He works the night shift at the casino, and he says his sleep isn't consistent. So he'll stay up all night, come home. He might sleep a couple hours in the daytime and go back to work. On days he doesn't work, he just stays up all day to just do stuff. And so it's a choppy sleep experience. It's 5'8", 240 pounds. And again, for behavioral therapists, that could be an unsettling thing to ask someone their weight. As a physician, we have medical equipment, it's a thing. It's not unheard of to say, and I've never had a patient say, well, why do you need to know my height and weight? And there's a reason we're going to get into why this is important. And I asked him about his nutrition. Out of 21 meals a week, he said on average, 21 out of 21 are either takeout food or food he gets from the casino restaurant. Doesn't cook at all, 0. And I wouldn't qualify like microwaving a hungry man as cooking, right? But the real questions I'm asking are, what percentage of your meals are not freshly prepared? You think about that, asking it in that different way, suddenly it's a lot better than saying, do you have any problems with your appetite? Which is our standard thing. Have you had loss of appetite? Our sign for depression. And I think that this is a much better way of getting into some of these things. So again, out of the last 21 meals, how many of those would you estimate are freshly prepared? Or how many of them would you say have definitely a lot of like processed, junk food qualities? So really interesting, because it took me a while to kind of get this strategy, because it's really enlightening. So you forget about all that other stuff. And I just want you to imagine this man's lifestyle. He's working at night. He's overweight. He has no physical outlet. He eats poorly. His sleep is all over the place. And I remember when I was in residency and I had to be on call, and I would get 3-4 hours of sleep on call. The next day, I was miserable physically and emotionally. And I remember at the end of a 36-hour shift, I just didn't care. I really didn't care what happened to patients. And that's a terrible thing to say, but that's what happens when you're sleep deprived. But suddenly that all dawned on me. These kind of health overviews, you think about it, where would you, as a behavioral health provider, do this? If you have a 60-minute intake, it's going to take time. If you have a 90-minute intake, it's still going to take time. You got all the other forms. But this information is critical when it comes to gambling recovery as a tool to get people in recovery. All right. So let me do that. So before I do that into the health, I just want to kind of emphasize, again, how I frame these things about health and impact of gambling on health. I really think about gambling and how it impacts 5 major health behaviors that we know will lead to chronic illness. So smoking is absolutely number 1 factor that leads to chronic illnesses. So how many of you actually do tobacco cessation work with gamblers? It's probably not often. We're like, oh my God, we have so many millions of things to do. The last thing I want to do is smoking cessation. But I would argue smoking cessation is one of the first things we can do that will really make a difference in how people feel and how people just are. Regular physical activity. So we can prevent chronic disease if we're doing regular physical activity. You can rename it regular physical movement. If you want to use exercise, you can, but I think that comes with it a lot of stigma almost. Keeping our alcohol use to a moderate or 0. So moderate, again, is 14 drinks or less per week for a man, 7 or less for a woman. Now, some of you may be, oh my God, 7, that's nothing. That's like Tuesday. And this is just the science. This is just the data telling us that if you drink more than 7 or 14, you run the risk of running some chronic diseases down the road. Maintaining a healthy weight. Now, this is a really fascinating thing, is that our goalposts have shifted a little bit, where we say, well, what's an appropriate weight, based on body mass index or Maybe it's weight, it's a number. We shouldn't focus on that. We should focus on vitality. We get that, but for the most part, still, we know that healthy weight maintenance is a major, major protective factor for chronic physical illnesses. And again, daily sleep. So suddenly you see how I'm starting to put down a roadmap for every single behavioral health provider to start thinking, well, wait a minute. If I focus on these tasks and getting their physical health better, will that make their gambling behavior reduce as well? And so even if you just stop the gambling behavior, but let's say someone is not gambling, but they're still smoking and drinking and not exercising and sleeping poorly and overeating, I would argue we're really not doing that much more for them short of them stopping gambling. So that's why I fold all of this as an area that all of us should be doing, not just physicians. Okay. So to give you a sense of how good or how bad we are in America, this kind of these markers. So think about this roadmap. These are the goals of what we want for healthy activity. Physical activity and movement. This comes from the feds. They say 2.5 hours a week of moderate physical activity. 7 days a week, 20 minutes, 25 minutes a day. So that could be as simple as parking a little farther away. And you can imagine this is why it happened, working from home has changed a lot, everything. So those are the guidelines. In California, how good are we? This is about maybe 10 years old now, but it's relatively. For 18 and over in California, 24% of Californians met that physical activity guideline. 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4. Sunshine 365 days a year, hiking, swimming, boating, every sport you can do within heartbeat, and only 1 out of 4 people do it. And I don't know what that number would be for Kentucky, but one of the things I would highlight is jumping on some of these kind of like fitness crazes. Is pickleball a big thing in Kentucky? Somebody's going, yeah. So it's taking the sweep of the nation. And this is how I like to combine things that are happening in our world with what we're doing in recovery. I'm starting for a lot of folks who are like, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to go to get a trainer. I don't want to run. I'll say, well, what about something like pickleball? I don't know anything about that. That's for like old people. I say, no. It's for everybody. I play pickleball. I play tennis. I play squash. And pickleball is incredibly fun. And that's the sort of blending of physical activity and social connection that for very cheap, it doesn't cost much to play pickleball. Literally, it's free if you can get a community court to do it. I'm highlighting, again, some tricks down the road, but this is a great starting point for a lot of our gamblers. When you're not doing this physical activity, or when you are doing it, imagine what happens. And you can suddenly you're not driving to the casino, you're actually doing stuff. That's physical activity. Number 2, obesity, weight management. Calculating body mass index is fairly easy. There's a lot of calculators. You can do it on your own. And the real question is how would this conversation go for a non-physician? So if as a therapist, you say, listen, I'm going to talk to you about your weight. Is the client going to be like, that's outside your scope of practice? You shouldn't be talking to me about my weight. You have no business talking about that weight. I would argue, no, I have every business. And just because I'm not a physician doesn't mean I can't still educate you, inform you of what the risks are, and let you know where you stand. I think that's within the scope of practice of every single mental health provider. And again, where's Kentucky here? My map is, there it is, in the red. 35 to 40% of U.S. adults in Kentuckians are reported there at a BMI of 35 to 40. And in California, 30 to 35. It's probably going to be in the next 20 years, and the entire nation will be all red. So again, we know that this is a national and global issue. We have to do better. All right, when it comes to substances, again, that's the story on drinks. Excessive drinking. The language I use is this: if you're drinking heavy, there's binge drinking too much, too fast in one night. And then there's heavy drinking, too much, prolonged over a course of time. So there are different languages, binge or heavy. but I fold it under excessive drinking as a category. That doesn't mean they're alcohol use disorder. It means we need to do more screening and more education to get them back down to this number. Interestingly enough, this number comes from a dietary guideline. So we almost have to think about alcohol as food. I don't think any of us think about that, but there's calories, there's satiety. It's definitely that. All right, tobacco. And again, does anyone? You're in tobacco country. Does anyone know what the smoking prevalence rates are in Kentucky? I'd be curious what does anyone know that? Anyone? No. We know in America it's about 13%. In California, it's about 13%. So still, we know that there's a lot of folks that are still using tobacco-related products, and I'm including vaping devices there, in addition to just combustible cigarettes. Okay. Cannabis, and we'll have a lot more on cannabis in a little bit, but recent surveys are showing about 20% of Americans have used cannabis at one point in their lives. We know that this is not quite right, but it's about that the prevalence of cannabis use disorder is about 3% of the general population. All right, sleep. This is my favorite slide here. And this weekend, daylight savings time, right? Do you have daylight savings time in Kentucky? Yeah. It kills people, right? We hear these stories about daylight savings and the shift and increased heart rates, heart attacks, shortly thereafter. This is where national survey data, what percent of Americans are actually getting less than 7 hours a night? So means this is not good. You need 6 to 8 hours. But here in Kentucky, what is going on there? You got almost 38% of Kentuckians not getting the recommended amount of sleep. I have a theory that some of this has to do with East Coast start times to sports. So like football and basketball and the World Series doesn't start to like 8 p.m. sometimes out east, right? And it's like 1, 2 a.m. before things end. So when was the last time any of you really took time to talk about sleep hygiene and why it's so critical to our patients? It's such a missing element, I think, in behavioral health, because many folks have not, they get short sleep, not because they have a sleeping problem, as a lifestyle choice, as I don't want to sleep, or as a direct byproduct of the consequences of gambling. They're driving back and forth or just staying up, on the thing they can't stop. But if they didn't have that, they would sleep completely fine. So I think that's a huge, all of these things are foundational blocks to recovery. If you sleep better, if you eat better, if you're more vibrant energy wise, you're going to be able to learn and the things better inside therapy. You're going to do things like that. Okay. So why does this matter? Because when it matters, when we look at gambling disorder and health, we now have about 20 years of information showing that there's this relationship. Here's an example of national data, 43,000 Americans that this is older term, but again, pathological gambling, more likely to have problems with your heart, faster heart rates, chest pain, cirrhosis, medical utilization rates that go up, more primary care doctor visits, more ER visits, more accidents. So all these things that we know that if you have gambling disorder, you're more likely to also have medical issues. And so what's the story there? Here's a survey from a primary care doctor. So showing that 574 adults showing up, 11% met criteria for gambling disorder. Another 5% gambling problems early on. So 15% of that urban clinic, gambling disorder. So if you're not already working with a primary care clinic, you really ought to be encouraging them to screen, encouraging them to say, hey, when you have someone with gambling issues, you send them our way. That's a great way of getting some referrals. But another national survey, this time from Canada, showing that of 11,000 women in Canada, that if you were a gambling disorder, again, you rated your own quality of physical health as lower. You were more likely to have chronic illnesses like bronchitis and fibromyalgia and migraines. So that link explore that. Gambling disorder, what does it do to the body? We know that it increases heart disease. Again, national data showing this, that if you meet gambling disorder, you have higher odds of having a heart attack, arteriosclerosis, angina, beyond established risk factors. So when they control for everything else, it really showed that being having the state of gambling disorder was not good for the body. Same thing again, not just to the heart, but also to your lifestyle choices. So this was a survey that showed that gambling disorder clients were more likely to not exercise, smoke more, drink more, use more caffeine, and watch more television. Now, this was 2013. I suppose if we repeat this, it'll probably be also more likely to doom scroll or more likely to be on social media in an unhealthy way. And what is it about the gambling disorder that's conveying that risk? We all know what it is. It's misery, it's emotional pain, it's suffering, it's stress, and all of these other things are meant to kind of take that away. But this question, why don't you exercise more? I think comes from a lot of gamblers, at least in my experience, saying to me, I don't have time, or that pessimism, it doesn't really matter. So why should I bother? Or that myopia where they say, yeah, fine, I run around for one day. That's not going to make my life better. So why should I do it? That kind of instant gratification. Now, if you exercise and go for a long walk, you feel good. And yet they still don't do it. So it's like delaying gratification, which is a real problem. Okay. So that link makes sense. So if you have gambling disorder, you're going to have a lot more physical and emotional stress, right? You're going to have a lot more adrenaline and cortisol that tends to be spilled out because of the stress of gambling. That fight or flight, you're in a fight or flight mode, quite a while, and you just don't do anything, and that's just going to create damage. In other words, think of it like, when soldiers go to war and they're constantly, under the pressure of war, that of course leads to PTSD, but also just the sheer strain of being under pressure for so long. I think that's one reason. So when you're under a lot of emotional stress, eventually your body takes its toll. There's a great book on trauma, right? The Body Keeps Score. Has anyone read that one? I forget the author. It's a Dutch author. The Body Keeps Score. All talking about how emotional trauma leads to physical damage. Number two, if they're not exercising, by definition, gambling is a very sedentary activity. They're not taking care of themselves physically. That will lead to more health-related problems. Number three, just the core aspects of gambling behavior and gambling disorder clients, right? Impulsive, risk-taking, very little interest other than gambling. You neglect the other things, the other self-care stuff, the exercise, the nutrition, and things like that. And a lot of it's that impulsive thinking, like, why should I bother? I want results right now. I want to lose weight right this instant. I want to get shredded right now and look good, but that's just not how the world works. Unfortunately, our gamblers who come see us, they don't have insurance or they don't have the money. I also play golf. That's a very expensive sport, right? Probably almost as expensive as you can possibly imagine. So that's beyond the reach of a lot of our clients. So again, that's not having the money to go join a gym membership, which in LA can be $200 a month to join a gym. Yeah, I mean, that's LA because people want to go to the shishi, be seen kind of places. We also know about genetics. The same risk factors that lead to heart disease may also lead to gambling disorder. The same risk factors that lead to alcohol addiction certainly lead to gambling addiction. So similarly, that's why there's a link. And again, when you use lots of substances, that takes a toll on your body. Tobacco, alcohol, tobacco, alcohol, tobacco, alcohol. And of course, with gambling combined, that's partly why your health is deteriorating. So we look at this then, like, what does this mean? This is data from our state program, and you'll see these things that are reflected in the real patients that come in. Every year, and it's pretty similar every year, our gamblers come in, they got diabetes, hypertension, obesity, chronic illnesses. They rate their 30% of our clients rate their health, self-report as fair or poor, a much higher percentage than other Californians. Most have health insurance, but 20% do not. That's a big number. And most have access to a primary care provider, a lot don't. So that means every year you don't have primary care provider checking things. Chronic illnesses would just slowly take its toll, right? About 27% of our gamblers who come into treatment smoke. So that's a big number, twice the state average. They definitely drink more alcohol and binge drinking and excessive drinking. And they use about the same rates of cannabis as our general population in California. And I think part of that is we don't yet have those links with cannabis and gambling, right? Where the cannabis consumption lounges and casinos, or that cannabis and gambling ads that are merging together. That marketing force isn't there. Cannabis and gambling doesn't quite go hand in hand, like say gambling and alcohol, gambling and smoking yet. That could change, but not yet. Okay. Unfortunately, one of the most tragic and awful consequences of health is, of course, suicide. And that's where we know that, and you had a whole session on suicide earlier today. This is, again, reflected here in our data in California, that 20% of our gamblers, and when they come into treatment, are endorsing yes to this question and intake. How often have you been bothered by thinking you would be better off dead, or you want to hurt yourself in some way over the last 7 days? This isn't directly, are you suicidal, but it's saying, are you hopeless? Are you miserable? Would you rather be dead? 1 out of 5 of our gamblers are coming in saying that. Contrast that to about 2% of Californians are saying that within the last week, men and women. So we all know this. This is just more data to reflect why that's such a crucial part. One thing I'll add to that about the suicide issue is that there is now more data showing that the gamblers who develop suicidal ideation, it tends to be driven, number one, they have lifetime histories of doing this, but also high levels of anxiety in the moment. The source of that anxiety might be debt. Source of that anxiety might be being discovered. Source of that anxiety might be potentially losing their job. So when I screen for suicidality, I'll do it 2 ways. I'll say this in the last week, how often have you been bothered by thinking about you'd rather be dead? And then number 2, I'll say, how would you rate your just level and intensity of anxiety and fear in the last week? Just a global. Oftentimes we can sense this from someone when they're agitated, but this is also gives you a sense of, they were like, yeah, I'm really been anxious the last week. That's going to alert me to suicide prevention work. Okay, so gambling and smoking. What do we know about that? Well, again, elevated, and data from our state treatment. California overall, about 10% of Californian folks smoke. Here you see men or women, it doesn't matter. They're smoking more. Women gamblers tend to be smoking even more than our male gamblers. This is massive. Our casinos are smoke-free, kind of. So you can't sit by the slot machine and smoke directly, but the smoking lounges are very close. And you can still smell the smoke, not as overt as, say, a lot of the Vegas casinos, but you're still there. But you still see people smoking heavily inside a casino there itself. All right, what do we know about gambling and sleep in our portions? And again, just documenting kind of what we think, but it's also true. Gambling disorder, you're going to sleep worse. More sleep problems, that means you're going to have more problems falling asleep, more problems staying asleep, more problems with waking up early, and more problems with what we call shallow sleep. Really shallow, non-restful sleep. We have national survey data. We have community survey data that kind of verifies that. And again, when your sleep is poor, you can't do the work of recovery. You can't do the work of therapy. And I think that's why I'm really emphasizing that we focus on that impact. All right, so cannabis and gambling. So here's where where we're headed. This is a social casino game that combined cannabis and gambling into one product. And you can see it gets 4.5 stars, so somebody likes it. And you pay money, you spin the wheel, you see cannabis paraphernalia and imagery everywhere. You win, you quote, win virtual coins. You do not win cannabis. They don't send you any cannabis or anything like that, but you can imagine we're just a couple steps away from that sort of thing happening. So the question is for us, does cannabis in of itself make people gamble more, or does it make it gamble less? We know convincingly alcohol raises people's likelihood of gambling and taking bets. Nicotine, same thing. Stimulants, same thing. But when it comes to cannabis, this is where the data is not clear. This is where we think we know where it's headed, but we're not 100% sure. We know that cannabis in general, no matter how you ingest it, should for the most part make you more likely to be impulsive, take risks, decrease your decision-making capacity, make it more likely that you'll drink and smoke more, change your perception of time. We know that to be true. And what other better place to do that than inside a casino where there are no clocks? Alter your moods in all sorts of ways, ups and downs, paranoid, agitated, calm, euphoric. And again, just impair your ability to make decisions in the moment. We know that. What we also don't know, though, is over long term, is what does it do to your gambling behavior? Does it make you bet higher? Does it make you and enhance your gambling urge and craving to do more? Does it lower your response to gambling losses biologically? Those are questions we don't have answers to. Those are things we're curious about. This is what we do know, certainly, though, is that if casinos market toward cannabis, if casinos had cannabis consumption lounges, then we know that people are going to do both together. We know if you marketed this in billboards, they're going to do both together. We also know that when professional gamblers talk about using cannabis to help stay focused during poker tournaments, we know that's going to get people more interested in using. I don't have clear answers on this down the road. I think it's important for us, though, to be well aware that there will be more merging between cannabis and gambling, and it's on us to figure out what is that doing to both kinds of behaviors. Again, the gamblers that come into treatment at California, they're using cannabis at the same frequency as non-gamblers, but that's 20% of them. So lots and lots of people are using these substances. All right, so that's reflected in that slide. That's again, cannabis use is increasing among our folks who are showing into treatment. We don't have updated data, but again, 20%, 21, 26. Every year that passes, we're getting more and more people entering treatment that are self-reporting that, yes, I use cannabis. So again, give you a sense of, we have probably 1,000 dispensaries in the state of California or something like that. Just a very large number. One of the outcomes that we've been able to show that we can, after treatment is finished by the state program, get some reduction to people using cannabis unregularly. And so we feel good about that. Again, I'm not saying that people should stop using cannabis. Is that we just don't know what the impact is cannabis going to be on the natural course of gambling addiction. But if it's anything like any of the other substances out there, we know it's probably not a healthy impact on it there as well. All right, so let me turn to strategies. And these are things that I do in the office or over Zoom, really to highlight some of these health and wellness strategies. And these are good for all types of gamblers, sports bettors, slots, it doesn't really matter. And I want you to think about, well, is that something I am comfortable doing in my practice? Is that within my scope of work? Is that something that my state board would frown upon, or would they say, no, these are reasonable? Is that something my boss would say, no, I don't want you doing this at all? Or no, that sounds like really good. Is it something I could bill for as an extra service? So when it comes to physical activity and movement, yes, the standards are to understand why they're not doing it and identify those barriers, cost, time, false misconceptions. Sometimes for folks who don't have any, can't afford anything, I start with, let's just start with 1 minute per day and gradually build up by 1 minute every single day. I mean, and it's very rare that someone would be like, no, I won't walk for a minute. Sometimes you need, professional support via a trainer, via a coach, and having those resources available to your clients is great. For those of you that are running outpatient clinics or residential settings. This is where importing those folks into the thing and actually having that part of the program. It's amazing to me how many intensive outpatient programs I see do not incorporate physical movement throughout the day. You're there 3 to 5, 6 hours, and you don't include physical movement as one of the hours. And it's kind of like that'd be like going to school and not having, gym. Structured activity plus socialization equals sustainability. So it's the idea that if, for instance, you are able to get a client to starting to play pickleball, and they know the pickleball classes are Friday, Saturday, Sunday at 10 a.m., that's structure. And then there's socialization. So you're getting really accomplishing two goals at once. You're getting physical movement plus increased connection that will yield to the likelihood of them coming back. I wouldn't keep playing tennis if I don't have someone to play with. I'm not going to play pickleball if there's no one else across the net. So that combo, physical activity that's set in a schedule combined with doing it with other people. We've had a lot of success in California with these running clubs where in fact, our residential program does that, where they have the gamblers join a running club to eventually make a goal to run the LA Marathon. So that's part of some strategies for physical movement there. The healthy eating, I think that we have to go back to why isn't this incorporated? There's a huge movement as food as medicine, and we never talk about it. And I think in behavioral health, it's such a critical area. We talk a lot about food insecurity or access to healthy food, but we're not actually talking about healthy eating and adhering to those principles that we know are important, fresh fruits and vegetables and all that good stuff. One area of health and wellness you may not have thought about that I highlight is just really getting rid of extra prescription medication. This is where, wait, no, hold on. This is where it's really important to look at how do we get rid of extra meds that could lead to overdose or that could lead to ongoing addiction. And that's where I've really incorporated this a lot more, because I see a lot of patients who come in and they have 3, 4, 5 prescriptions from other psychiatrists or other that they don't use. And I put that under the lens of health and wellness. So it's something, because unfortunately, that we really need to be focused on, because if people are just exposing themselves potentially to overdose, that's certainly something that of great concern. And then tied in with that, of course, is naloxone education for our clients. Even with my gamblers that I see, I put that in there. They have an addiction, therefore they're at risk for other things. And again, when you think about a lot, at least in California, a lot of our overdoses are not heroin. They're almost all fentanyl pill overdoses. So you can imagine a gambler under a lot of strain, a lot of anxiety, who happens upon a source of pills for anxiety or sleep. That's the story. Fortunately, I've not lost any gamblers to overdose. I have lost a number of men and women with opioid use disorder, obviously, but it's an area I think we need to continue to explore and beef up a little bit. All right, sleep hygiene. Think about what you do with sleep. Think about our usual strategies, which are very surfacey. Oh, make sure you get plenty of sleep. Go to bed early. Get 6 to 8 hours. But actually getting those 6 to 8 hours is really, really difficult, right? So many barriers, and it's worthy, I think, of working inside treatment to focus on it. So when I talk about sleep hygiene, it's going to take 10, 15, 20 minutes where you got to go over what is your environment. Let's make some sleep diaries. What are your hygiene practices? What would it mean for you not to look at your phone right before bed? Can you sleep without your phone? We all know that the lights in the phone is enough to disrupt your circadian rhythm, but we do it anyway. But the other 3 things I would highlight here that we don't do enough is I do like telling a lot of my clients to schedule naps during the day, 20 to 30-minute naps, and midday to help them sleep later on at night. And there's been more data showing that weighted blankets, surprisingly, are very, very good for sleep initiation and management of anxiety. How many of you use or have recommended weighted blankets? A couple. And again, small things that can make a big difference for someone with gambling disorder, because it's not something they may have ever heard about. If we can make these little improvements in their health, then that certainly we know recovery will be a lot better. Here's an example of a sleep diary. I get a lot of gamblers come in, oh, I can't sleep, my sleep is terrible. And then when I ask them to do the diary, they'll come back and I'll see them shade out. It's 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. And I'll say, you don't have a problem with sleep. You have a problem with going to bed on time. That's not a sleep problem. That's a sleep choice issue. Or I'll see some folks, again, going to bed at like 11 and then waking up at 1. And then those are obviously sleep problems that we can then, but only on Sunday or Saturday, Sunday or Monday. And then you'll say, well, why is it, what's this pattern? And then you'll get out there's something else happening that's disturbing that. When it comes to the substances and with our gamblers, I think we have to be much, much firmer about firm recommendations about use of alcohol, nicotine, and cannabis, and really highlighting how if you have a problem with these substances and you have gambling disorder, we have to get all the addictions at once. We shouldn't just do gambling and leave nicotine operating. We shouldn't just do gambling and allow you still to binge drink and excessively drink alcohol. This is a little bit of a shift over the last 30 years, particularly in a lot of recovery don't deal with the tobacco. That's the last thing. That's very hard. No, it's the same brain. It makes sense that we need to do all of these conditions simultaneously. It doesn't feel like it's much harder. It is more of a task. Okay. One of the things I highlight here, in addition for health, is this other piece about just positive social connections and how critical that is. So this is the Harvard study of adult development that followed men over 75 years and really highlighted that the good positive social connections is really the antidote and this part of the secret sauce for healthy and happier quality of lives. Even more so, we know that healthy relationships allow you to live longer. Even more so, we know that loneliness kills, and this is a direct quote, as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. I can't think of a more lonely, provoking kind of condition than gambling disorder. I do not have any clients who are like, yeah, I gamble with friends and I have gambling addiction. Invariably, it's always by themselves. And when you think about mobile sports betting, it cannot get more lonely than that. Doing it on your phone against a faceless app. You're not even playing poker with someone else across the table you can look at. You're betting on your phone, no human interactions, completely anonymous. So the question there has to be, is also adding to our repertoire, how do we discuss loneliness with our clients? How do we bring up that topic? How do we get them to find the strength and courage to go back and talk to people in real life? One of the things I've noticed throughout the pandemic is just such a tremendous loss of social skills and ability. Think about what you're doing here today. You're doing 8 hours in person at a conference. And I'm sure many of you are like, I'm so tired. This is a long day. We've lost our conference sea legs, as it were, that ability to stand and listen and be with other people, because we haven't done it for 2.5 years. I mean, I was at a conference last week and it was the same thing. By like 1 o'clock, I'm like, I'm exhausted. When do I get to take my normal afternoon nap? And that's the perfect example why I'm highlighting that getting back to human connections is something we have to emphasize because it impacts physical health. All right, so I know we were scheduled for an hour and a half, but this really was about an hour's worth of material. I wanted to leave plenty of time for kind of debate, questions, ideas. And if you want to know a little bit more about cannabis, I can get into some deeper stuff on cannabis in and of itself. But I wanted to give you that roadmap of what I like to do for our gamblers when it comes to physical health. All right, thanks for sticking out. I know it's been a long day, but hopefully this gives you kind of some ideas that you hadn't thought about before. But please, let's open up the venue to questions, comments, and other ideas.
Tim, this is Kurt Barrett. It's great to see you again. I want to emphasize what you said about the role of physical fitness in recovery, and put in a plug for an organization out in Oregon called Sit and Be Fit. It's available free on PBS, and the originator of it, a nurse named Wilson, is very, very supportive of the use of this program in recovery programs. And so it's free and available on PBS. And if it's not on a local PBS station, she can get that done. Again, it's free, it's very attractive, and people tend to stay with it.
It's really great. Great to hear from you. I know you've been in this business for 20 plus years, and I remember meeting you very early on in my career there as well. So great to hear you're still doing it.
Any comments about anything? Everybody's ready to go.
We're so tired. We're all so tired. It's only 2 o'clock out here, so we got some more time. But
Okay, well, we want to thank you, Dr. Fong, for your afternoon with us. We so appreciate it. Hopefully next time we can have you in person. He's a wealth of knowledge. I've been excited. A lot of people said they couldn't be here for just only parts of the conference, and what did I see was the most important, and I circled you. So you did not disappoint in any way, and I appreciate that.
thank you so much for accommodating and all that. All right, well, we'll call it a day, and feel free to email me and call me if you need anything. And hopefully more folks will get out to the National Council of Problem Gambling and keep doing the work that we do.
Let's give Dr. Fong a hand.